Hi kids, this is the first time a lot of you guys have heard my voice in quite a long time. I'll be back on Monday, February 1st. I feel like I'm on the radio right now. But today we're going to go over the coral reef notes. You guys have been doing almost all of the learning, and I'm just going to go ahead and sum that up and give you a little bit of notes. So make sure you're copying your notes in your notebook. Make sure you highlight when I say hint, hint, nudge, nudge. And I might even try and highlight it on the PowerPoint. This is my first time doing this, so, cross fingers. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to text me, but I will be back on February 1st. So, coral reefs. Coral reefs are similar to rainforests. They are complex and very diverse. We're in marine biology, and ecology is a huge part of this. And without the coral reefs, the diversity of the ocean would be completely different than it is today. Some of you guys went over the diversity of coral reefs in your presentations, and I'm looking forward to grading those online. Alright, so here we have, this is just a picture of what it looks like underneath the ocean. Some of us have seen coral reefs in person, others have just seen them in pictures here, but you can see there's a very wide variety of life with corals and sponges and anemones and fish and eels and sharks and sea turtles and seagrass and all that fun stuff that's going on. So, what is a coral reef made out of? Well, a coral reef is made out of calcium carbonate, CaCO3, and they pull that out of the ocean. So coral reefs are actually very important for reducing the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere because they pull that in with CaCO3. And what basically is it forms like a hard skeleton, and the animal lives inside. And remember, corals are animals. This is just a big, massive amount of animals all kind of hanging out together. And then when they die, they just leave their exoskeleton behind, and the new ones grow on top of it. Here we go, this is another picture. You can see some fan corals and the fish that live there and the relationships that they have together. Alright? Now, coral reefs, we talked about reproduction of invertebrates last semester, and remember guys, February 2nd, February 4th, test retakes. Coral polyp is a sac attached in the cnidarian stage of the mouth with tentacles popped up. So what happens is the coral, its polyp, it goes in the larval stage in the ocean, and then it'll come, and we'll see the life cycle of the coral reef in a diagram here as we go along. But again, these guys are cnidarians, and cnidarians have stinging tentacles with nematocysts in them, and they also have your guys' favorite, a mouth anus. Alright, so this is a coral polyp. You can see that the kind of medusa stage when they're in the when they're plankton floating through, and then they drop and they become sessile. Remember, that term never goes away. And this is what forms a coral polyp. You can see anemones of the polyp as well. But these guys form, and then they become the coral reef. Now their tentacles are not usually hanging out. You guys saw with the fringing coral reef color highlight, the daytime was the top and the nighttime was the bottom. And during the daytime, everything was out and it was all colorful. But at night, most of those things went back into their calcium carbonate exoskeleton and were not visible during the nighttime because they had no reason to be, because they weren't filtering. There wasn't a lot of photosynthesis going on, so they really had nothing to do. So they were kind of in their rest stage as we do at night. So you can see here on the left we have the coral polyp with its tentacles and its stinging nematocysts ready to go. And then the second one, there's a withdrawn polyp. So if they ever feel threatened or at night, they pull those tentacles in and they hide. And then you have the empty coral cup, which is basically, when something's happened and their tentacles get taken away or they're starting to die. Alright, you can see the anatomy of the coral here. Again, it's a polyp stage, it's sessile, it's got a mouth anus, it's got tentacles with nematocysts in them, and basically this is the structure of the coral. Alright, so now a coral colony is an interesting thing. It's the founder coral that divides over and over. So basically what happened is a coral plankton came down and became sessile in an area where there wasn't anything hanging around, and then as it started broadcast spawning and putting out its egg and sperm, because some can be hermaphroditic, the larvae, when they come in, so the colony is quite literally all of the same genetically. They're all just different organisms. Okay? And what's interesting is if they get close enough to each other, their digestive systems can connect, and so can their nervous system. And so if you touch one, and all of them have their tentacles trying to pull plankton out of the water. If you touch one, it freaks them out, and the entire colony pulls their tentacles back in. It's really very interesting. So you can see here it's called a coral colony cutaway, and you can see that all of them are attached together. They share a lot of calcium carbonate, but they also have these little the tunnels in between that can allow their nervous system to go back and forth between all of them. So this is a coral colony. Again, so if you touched one of those, all the tentacles will go back in. It's a little freaky, but it's a defense mechanism, and they know when there's a predator about. Okay, now in the coral reef, we talked about this last semester. You guys' favorite word in the whole wide world, zooxanthellae. Okay, maybe not your favorite word in the world, but it was a dinoflagellate that we saw lives inside the tissue of other animals, and these guys love to live in coral. Okay, now they have a mutualistic relationship with them. They get protection, the organism gets food and color, they do the photosynthesis, and they pass some of that food that they get to the coral. Okay, they feed the coral from the inside, and they enable the coral to make calcium carbonate faster because the CO2 is coming out of the zooxanthellae and the dinoflagellates, which allows more carbon dioxide. So they pull that in with calcium in the water, and they make their calcium carbonate. And it's actually this is one of the best symbiotic relationships in the world when it comes to each one of them getting a great benefit from their relationship. All right, here we go. You guys got to remember this picture. Hopefully this is just pictures of zooxanthellae. They're green, but sometimes when we look at the pictures, we saw that they looked bluish, like the clams that had all that blue. That's the zooxanthellae that's living symbiotically with the clam. But they also live symbiotically with the corals, and we'll see some pictures of that in just a little bit about their relationship together. All right, so now you can see here, it's kind of hard to tell, but inside of each of the tentacles there, you're going to have the zooxanthellae. They kind of just embed themselves into the coral polyp, and then the sunlight comes in, and they do photosynthesis, and they create their sugar, and they use 90% of the sugar, and they pass 10% on, and usually that 10% will go to the coral polyp, because that's the only place it really has to go, because the zooxanthellae don't leave the coral unless there's a really bad situation, and we'll talk about that in just a little bit. Alright, so 5 ways that coral feed. I wonder, is this going to be on the short answer portion of the test? I'm getting ready to say absolutely. You need to know the 5 ways that corals feed. So the first one is the zooxanthellae that live inside of them. They provide nutrients for the coral. The coral provides protection. They eat the sugar that the zooxanthellae make. They capture plankton with their stinging nematocysts on their tentacles. We know that. It's kind of just an obvious one there. Another thing you might not realize is they capture zooplankton with mucus nets. They will actually spew from their mouth anus a net of sticky mucus that captures plankton, and then they suck it back in, and then they take all the plankton out of it, and yum! Alright. They also digest organic material outside the body with those mesenterial filaments. I talked to you guys about this. I cannot remember who in each class I did this to, but when corals get too close to each other, they'll eviscerate their digestive material and their mesenterial filaments onto the one that's next to them, and then start digesting them, and then pull that material in. So that's another way. And then another way they do that is they absorb dissolved organic matter from the water itself. If it's just floating around, it's not really plankton, but it is totally edible for our filter feeders, and for our plankton eaters, and for the broadcast eaters that are out there. Okay, so the 5 ways that coral feed on the test. Alright, so here's a coral polyp. It's getting ready. Its tentacles are out. I think this one here is getting ready to become sessile. Pardon me, I had to drink a beverage. I haven't talked this much in a long time. Alright. And then here we have, remember, stinging nematocysts? It's like that harpoon that shoots out the barb with the poisons on it. Debilitates the prey, and then they're able to pull that prey into the mouth anus. Alright, here we have the mesenterial filaments inside the gut. And then you have the mouth anus. Remember, the mesenterial filaments get vomited out, for lack of a better word. And that it has digestive materials in it, and then they digest whatever they touch, and then bring that material back inside for consumption. All right, here's an amazing picture. The red coral on the right has shot out its mesenterial filaments and is starting to digest the corals on the left. Pretty amazing picture. Always makes me think of, like, science fiction. All right, so reef builders and other things like that. The first one we're going to talk about is encrusting coralline algae. We learned about coralline algae in the Sea of Cortez video. Basically what these guys are is they deposit calcium carbonate, which is limestone, and they add that to the structure of the reef, building the reef up. So these guys are actually reef builders. They form these things called algal ridges, which block waves and prevent erosion of the land. Because if the land erodes, okay, or the waves come in too hard, coral reefs can get destroyed. Okay, and what these guys do is they cement sediments into place, and that keeps them from washing the coral reef away. We've learned that some of these things, like this algae, gets really stuck to the rocks, and it's really hard to get them back out because it's firm. These are the kind of algae that we don't eat. They're hard. They got the white little crusties around them, but fish love coralline algae. And then, obviously, it's just a symbiotic relationship. Sometimes they're good, sometimes they're bad. All right, here you can see this is some encrusting coralline algae on a rock in the coral reef. And while it's alive, it's doing photosynthesis. When it's dead, it provides more structure to the coral reef, building it up, making it bigger, providing more habitats for other living organisms. All right, here's some more encrusting red coralline algae. This time you got a little sea fan there down the lower left. And again, just a reef builder, a way of making the reefs get bigger, get healthy, have places for animals to live and gain protection from bigger predators that would eat them. All right, so here we go. Let's talk about an algal ridge. Okay, so you look at the picture here, and you've got the shore and the beach and the mangroves, and then there's a rocky shore. You have the reef flat, and then the reef slope. Obviously, it's going to go down. And then as the water comes from the land into it, it's going to take all the fine sediment down to the lower portion here where it has this red sediment and rubble. And the reef crest is where you're going to get it's a wave block. Okay. So now if you look in the lower left picture there, you can see all of that green right off the shore. That is an algal ridge. So even if there isn't much of a beach, the algae that grows out there, okay, is encrusting coralline algae, provides almost like a land, like a structure to prevent the breakdown of the coral reef in that particular area. Very important, very important. All right, so coral reef reproduction. This is very important. And I'm pausing for some strange reason. All right, so sometimes they're asexual. They clone themselves. A coral colony is an example of that. Some corals are hermaphroditic, not all. Some actually have male coral and female coral, and if they're not by each other, there is no reproduction. Because they have to spawn out, and will it get to the females or the males? You never know. Now they have this thing called mass spawning or broadcast spawning, like the clams do, and all of that. And I cannot remember if the Treasures of the Great Barrier Reef talked about this, but between October and November, in the Great Barrier Reef off the coast of Australia, it is broadcast spawning season for almost every living thing down there, because it's the season for them to make the babies, and then the babies swim around, and there's lots of plankton, and then they come down and they land and they form more coral and rebuild the coral as it goes along. And then all the larvae from these things are called planular larvae because they're kind of flat, but we'll see that in the cycle when I show you the life cycle of the coral. Alright, so here's budding. You can see right there in the lower right portion of that, that's a bud getting ready to pop off of the coral. So that's an example of asexual reproduction. So that would be like a cloning of itself. Okay? And then here we have this little teeny one right there on the right, top right, all by itself. That's going to be a bud that pops off, and then it's going to kind of flip itself, and then it's going to come down and become sessile and form the new colony. So that's asexual as well. Okay, then we have coral spawning, and you can see that these are all just eggs popping out of coral in hopes that they find some sperm in the water and get fertilized and form the plankton so that they can eventually become the polyp and become sessile. Okay, here's broadcast spawning. This is the sperm. So the eggs are popping out like they are, and this is the sperm coming out of a colony of coral. And again, it's usually not just one. It's something about the temperature of the water and the availability of nutrients, and it's at certain times of the year when the water is perfect for this that they all know now's the time. Now we got to breed. If we don't do it now, it's not going to happen. All right, here is the life cycle of the coral reef. Okay, so we're going to start over here. It says colony begins, let's see. So synchronous release of sperm and egg bundles which quickly rise to the surface. And yes, the predators are going to eat those. They know. This is what they do. Okay, the cell division starts because we remember that. You get eggs, they become the planular larva after 4 days, and they begin searching for a place to become sessile. They plop down to the ocean floor or something that's flat. You know, sometimes they find an animal that's kind of doing that, and you see that on sea turtles every once in a while. And then they develop, forms into a sessile being, and then the tentacles start to grow, and now you've got a colony of coral. Alright, here's some more coral spawning pictures here. I mean, it's pretty amazing, you know, because these things happen, and so many of them happen, and yet we still got quite a few of these as long as we keep the oceans healthy. Okay, coral spawning, you could actually see the little eggs coming out of the, and again, the mouth anus, because it's all one opening for cnidarians. Okay, so conditions for reef growth is a new topic here, so let's talk about these. In order for a reef to grow, you've got to have photosynthesis. If you don't have photosynthesis, the reef's not going to grow because the zooxanthellae won't be able to eat. So you have to have clear, shallow water that light can penetrate through. Okay, you have to have warm water. It can't be too warm and it can't be too cold. It's got to be just right. It's like the three bears, but of coral colony growing. And you have to have what's called a stable salinity. If the salt is fluctuating up and down and up and down and up and down, the corals won't be able to grow, and that is not a place for the corals to grow. Alright, so I had to take a quick break there. I kind of lost my voice a little bit, and the dog kept barking. So, the conditions for reef growth: clear, shallow water, good light penetration for photosynthesis, warm water, and a nice stable salinity is going to make it so our coral reefs can grow. Okay, you can see here, clear water. Okay, when we were in Catalina, a couple of days, we had really clear water. When we were leaving, the sediments were coming in. Okay, so the plants that live, or the algae that lives in the Catalina area, less growth when there's more sediment floating in the water. Alright, so we talked about encrusting coralline algae. Now let's talk about the other reef builders that are out there. We're going to talk about oysters, because we've seen those. They keep building up and growing on top of each other. And if you ever get a chance to go out and actually harvest oysters, you'll see just how well they build things up and provide structure for coral reefs. Alright, then you've got the polychaete worms. We saw one of those in our Is It Alive lab, and you know, they have the external part of them, and when they die, they leave that behind. We have the shells from snails, clams, other mollusks, sea urchins, crustaceans, and sponges. Okay, so here we can see the oysters all building up on top of each other, building up part of the coral reef. And then this is the polychaete worm. It's got a little filter out there, but when the structure behind it is when the worm dies, it leaves behind that calcium carbonate body of itself. Okay, so sediment, salinity, and pollution are extremely important for the coral reefs. We talked about how it has to have clear water, and you got to be able to see the sunlight and the water and the warmth, and the salinity. So if you change those things, it can really affect how the coral reef is going to function. So what happens is when water comes in from the land and it hits the ocean, it takes with it all of the fine sediment that is on land, and what it does is it gets under the coral reef and it smothers it, and it blocks out all the light and prevents photosynthesis from happening with the zooxanthellae. The tentacles have problems coming out, and it's just a big bad problem for them. And then what happens is the coral mucus can clean H2O, but only for so long. So if it has a mucus, it'll spew it out to try and get rid of all the sediment, but eventually it does get clogged. Just like you have to change out a filter on something, the mucus nets that they have. That's also a situation for them, but they can't take theirs out and switch it out like we can a filter in our homes. Okay, so other parts about sediment, salinity, and pollution. You can see here, this is a pipe coming out from an industry. You can see there is something in that water. Maybe it's probably not that bad. With the EPA and the Environmental Protection Act of 1973, it really does prevent a lot of damage to our country. It used to be really, really bad. I mean, it used to be like black sludge coming out before, and so they can't do that, but they're still putting out sediments and pollution into the ocean that is ultimately going to affect our coral reefs. Okay, so here you can see all the rivers from the mountains come down, and when they come down, they bring the sediments with them. Okay, now when they all get together, they form what's called a delta. When you get to the delta, excuse me, the dogs are barking again. All right, so when the sediments all come down from the rivers, they hit what's called a delta, and all the big pieces of rock have fallen, and now it's just like sand and silt and clay. And so the sand, as soon as it hits the water, the sand drops. But the silt and clay are really, really small pieces, and they just go out. And they keep going out into the water, and eventually they'll get to the coral reef area. Okay? Now, who are some of the big perpetrators, if you will, in this situation? We're going to talk about mining. Okay, mining, you're digging up sediments. That's what you're doing. Logging, construction, dredging of the ocean builds up all this stuff. And so when you build up sediments in the water, it blocks out sunlight. When you block out sunlight, the corals can't eat, the zooxanthellae can't eat, and it's a big, big problem for the ocean. Okay, what causes some pollution? Pesticides, industrial waste, agriculture wastes, fertilizers. Fertilizers seem like a good thing, but they get into the algae and they cause eutrophication. Okay, it causes the phytoplankton to bloom like nobody's business, and that they cut out the oxygen for a lot of other things. And I'll talk about eutrophication in a little bit. But when you increase the algae and you block out the light, you get eutrophication. Okay, here you can see there's water pollution. This picture's a little old. I think it's probably, I can't remember where this picture was taken at, but that water is disgusting, and you know it's not fresh, and there's pollution in it, and that water is going to get into the ocean and pollute our oceans. Okay, here we have a eutrophication algal bloom. Okay, so what happened is that probably fertilizers they ran off the land into the water. Fertilizers make plants grow, make things that do photosynthesis grow. So therefore, the algae is going to bloom in the water, and when it does that, it cuts off all the sunlight, cuts off the oxygen for the animals, and usually everything dies but the algae. Okay, this is a satellite image of an algal bloom. So it's not just, you can see that it started at the land. So the lower left hand picture there, you can see all the algal blooms around the land there, and it's coming off at certain places where you have the delta at the top there, at the top part of the landmass there, and it just spreads and spreads and spreads because there's lots of sunlight beating down on the ocean, which is going to cause that algae to bloom even more and more. And if it's a closed in area like a lake or a pond, it can kill the lake or pond, but it can also kill off portions of the ocean while it's happening. Okay, now sediments and salinity and pollution can cause what's called coral bleaching. And coral bleaching is when the zooxanthellae are like, you know, excuse me, I'm getting out of here, and they leave the coral because the situation is just so bad that they can't live there anymore. There's too much pollution. The salinity is not right. They can't get any sunlight because it's being blocked by sediments, or the coral's covered in silt and clay, and they can't get to the light, and they can't get light anymore. So if they don't expel themselves from the coral, they die. But if they expel themselves from the coral dies. And that's what we call coral bleaching. Okay, so you can see here in this picture, coral aren't made out of calcium carbonate, limestone. Limestone is white. Okay, you can have some pink variations there, but you can see in the picture here, a good portion, that top piece of coral there, completely bleached. It's dead or dying, because if the zooxanthellae leave, the coral's going to die underneath it. Same thing with that lower picture there. That piece of coral is slowly dying, section by section, and that's what we call coral bleaching. Okay, This is a one piece of coral, a couple pieces of coral that have bleach individually. You can see on the bottom there, little segments of other pieces of coral are starting to bleach because the water's not right. It's not clear. It's not warm enough. They don't have enough sunlight. The salinity is probably messed up. There's too much pollution there. All these things are factors that can damage the ocean and the coral reef specifically. Alright, so here we have two pieces of the exact species of coral, exact same species of coral, but one was bleached and one has not. Okay, all the coral species that we have in the classroom on that back counter back there where the whale rib bone is, those are all bleached coral because you're not going to take a live coral out of the ocean. It's living. It's cemented to the ground. These ones here, that if it dies, I don't know where this picture came from. It's probably for purposes, but that's a book picture. So, all right. So here we go. Pre-bleach and post-bleach. Okay, all of those zooxanthellae are gone. The coral dies. That's just how it is. All right. So the primary producers for coral reefs, they do photosynthesis to make up food that feeds all the other life autotrophs. The primary producers in the coral reef are your zooxanthellae, your turf algae, the bacteria that live there, and the coralline algae. So these are the things that feed from the sun. Okay, remember the sun gives its energy to the producers, and these are the producers, and the producers are the bottom of the food chain, and they give 90%, they give 10% of the energy that they make to the next level up on the food chain, and so forth and so on. So the primary producers are very important. If the primary producers leave the coral reef again dies. Okay, here you can see turf algae. Turf algae, a lot of times in the coral reef you'll see like sea turtles come in and eat turf algae. In that Survivor Man where he goes to Alaska and he goes into what he calls Bounty Bay, and he calls sea lettuce. Sea lettuce is like a turf algae. It just grows along like, our grass, like our turf on a football field or something like that. Alright, here's some more turf algae. This is actually, I think this is the sea lettuce. Yeah, this is sea lettuce. So again, totally nutritious, not coralline algae, but it is a reef builder and it's a producer that provides energy for this ecosystem. Alright, so here you have cyanobacteria or blue-green algae, and these guys make a lot of oxygen for us. They're very important, but they also provide a lot of the nutrients for the food chain. Okay, and then you have your encrusting coralline algae. This is green encrusting coralline algae. We've seen red. Remember, it has that limestone in it, that calcium carbonate, that when it dies, it leaves behind a structure to build up the reef, build up the coral reef. Okay, and here's some red coralline algae. It looks purple, but it's actually red coralline algae. Again, it leaves behind a structure. You can see on the edges of it, all that little white, that is calcium carbonate, or limestone. Alright, so we have two types of coral. We have hard coral and we have soft coral, and the competitions that they have for each other. You're going to have some questions on your test about hard coral and soft coral competition, so make sure you know these. This is going to be the short answer portion, and probably going to be there's always going to be some multiple choice questions about this. So, hard corals, they are fast growers. They grow up and spread out to catch light and block others. So these guys are fierce competition with each other for space. They attack other organisms with those mesenterial filaments, and they digest. Remember we talked about, two of them get next to each other, and then two coral get next to each other, and then they throw up their mesenterial filaments and digest the other to grow. And then what happens is they have these things called sweeper tentacles, and they have stinging nematosystem. They sweep those tentacles out. If they're trying to get some space, the tentacles will harpoon their neighbors with their toxin and kill them, and then they'll digest them with the mesenterial filaments. So they have some, hard corals compete with each other. They can be for space and food and light and zooxanthellae and all of that stuff. Okay? So here you have some this is a plate coral, this is, you can see a lot of these in Nemo. Okay? These ones are kind of getting bleach a little bit. This is almost a nighttime picture of the coral there. But this is a hard coral, excuse me. So this is more plate coral. This kind of plates grow on top of each other, but if plates start to overlap, that's when you get a attack with the mesenterial filaments. Okay, and then here you have some corals stinging each other. It's kind of hard to see, but hopefully you can look at it. I can't really point it out to you guys. but their mesenterial filaments are out, and they're trying to block each other out. Alright, now soft coral, they also compete with each other, but these guys are just a little bit different here. Soft corals have sharp needle-like spicules to discourage predation. So when you go to grab them, they can, it's almost like they got a little stingy to them, but it prevents the other animals from eating it and from other corals from eating it. They can move around some, and they kind of slowly, and they sway back and forth, and some of these have toxic chemicals inside of them, and what happens is if they're competing with the hard corals, they can release those toxins, and those toxins can kill the hard corals. So it's interesting. A couple years ago, we went to Catalina. My kids just started eating everything out of the algae tank, and Desmond was like, we're trying these salty carrots. Not everything in there is edible. Come on, people. Because some of the soft corals grow in places where if you get too close to it, it can be attached to an algae, and then you're eating that up there. So here we have some soft corals. It kind of looks like brittle star, or kind of like basket stars, but they're not basket stars, they're corals. Alright, close up of another one here. It's got lots of tentacles out there, and they got a firmness to them with those, come like spikes and, things like that to protect them. Alright, here's some more. These guys, and a lot of these guys, hard corals and soft corals kind of live, really close to each other, so there's always a competition for space, there's always a competition for light, and there's always a competition for relationships, for symbiotic relationships and protection from predators. Okay, so you guys saw that I asked about two hypotheses about competition between corals, and I'm going to spell it out for you right now. You have the lottery hypothesis, and it says feeding habits, lifestyles, they overlap, and the competition is strong. So if two corals have the same kind of feeding habitats and a space that they live in, then they're going to compete with each other for space and food and all of that. And whoever just happens to be lucky is going to win. Okay? Now, you could say, you can't really say survival of the fittest, because, we don't really know. When it's out for luck, this is not a commonly accepted one, but it is a hypothesis. The deterministic, hypothesis, each organism has its own niche, and it's the most accepted. So what happens here is the coral grows best in that area because that area is best suited for it, and it does the best job in that area. I wouldn't, my niche would not be art. Miss Finzer, can you go teach art today? I'd be like, okay, this is not, I would wither and die in that area, because I don't know how to do that kind of stuff. So I do better with the sciences, okay? So I have my own little niche, kind of like that. Alright, some definitions. Hopefully you guys remember these. Ecological niche, what a species eats, where it lives, how it behaves, all of its lifestyle, its job, its role in the community. And then you have competitive exclusion. One species outcompetes the other. No two species can occupy the same niche. So each species does its own job, and there's really no competition, because they each go after something different. Okay? Now, predation on corals. In what way is a coral predation like a plant grazing on an herbivore? Okay? Predators graze down the coral without killing it off entirely. Okay? So when Mr. Cow, or Miss Cow, excuse me, is out eating grass in the field, is she pulling the grass out of the ground and eating the roots, or is she just eating the tips? She's just eating the tips that are growing up. Same thing with the coral reef. The animals that come in, like the parrotfish, they come in, they eat coral. They don't eat the coral all the way to the bottom of the coral. They just eat the parts that are out growing. Okay, that allows the coral to regenerate itself and to grow again, just like the grass will grow on the land. Alright, the effect predation has on the number of type of coral. Fast-growing corals are held in check by predation. The butterfly fish, coral-eating snails. The fast-growing corals are eaten very quickly by these organisms. Then you also have a sea star that only eats certain kind of corals. And so it comes into contact with a coral it doesn't eat, it's not going to consume it. Okay? Now, herbivores are grazers of the reef. The parrotfish, the damselfish, the sea urchins, the surgeonfish, snails and crustaceans. These are all herbivores. Now, some crustaceans are omnivores or carnivores, depending on which are, but these are the guys that will eat some coral. Okay, so here you have the parrotfish, and it'll eat some of the algae off the coral, but it will eat the coral itself too. Then you have some grazing fish, and they're grazing off the coral itself, algae, and some of the tentacles if they can get them. Okay, so what if the herbivores and grazers were removed? Grazers control algae growth. Algae overgrows the reef, kills the reef. The pollution is added. The algae grows, like I said, eutrophication chokes out everything but the algae. So let's look at some pictures of what eutrophication is. Okay, so on the left there you have a lake. Everything's looking good. On the right is what happened after too many fertilizer nutrients got into Lake Taihu. I think that's how they say it in China. All the algae grows like crazy. Every single animal in that lake is dead. They can't survive. There's no way for them to get oxygen. So this is part of the problem with fertilizers getting into the ocean, is this eutrophication process. So let's take another picture of this. Okay, so on the left here, you can see the differentiation between the two. At the beginning here, on the left, low nutrient levels, good light penetration, high dissolved oxygen, deep water, low algae growth, small bass, lake trout, pike, sturgeon, whitefish all thrive because they're able to get the foods that they need. On the right, after pollution got into the water, like fertilizers, high nutrient levels, which means the algae is going to go crazy because they love that stuff. The light can't penetrate, so the plants can't grow. Plants can't grow, the oxygen level goes down. It gets rid of the water level, okay, because the water's being evaporated, so the algae grows real high, and then very few fish can handle this. Carp can handle it, a bullhead, and the catfish is the most suited for a lake that has very little plant growth in it. All right, so symbiotic relationships. It's a quick review. Mutualism. Both organisms benefit. Commensal, one benefits, one is not affected at all. And then the parasitism. You get these viruses, bacteria, flatworms, leeches. One is harmed, one is benefited. All right, so some mutualistic relationships in the ocean: the zooxanthellid corals, anemones, snails, and giant clams. We talked about that. Corals and crabs. Corals they provide protection for crabs, shrimp, and fish, and then they get some food from them. Sponges. They actually, sometimes in sponges you'll find nitrogen-fixing cyanobacteria or blue-green algae living inside a sponge. And so nitrogen fixing allows for more the growth of plants and algae in water, so that the plants can grow, and the sponges allow that to happen. The anemone fish, which is the clownfish, but there's other fish out there besides the clownfish that do live with the anemone. And you got the obligate symbionts. I can't remember that word. They are committed, but they cannot live without each other. Okay. So let's go on here. So relationships between anemone and fish is: the anemone provides protection. They drive away their fish, and sometimes they'll feed their host. The anemone is a safe place. It nests the eggs, and they're brooded under the anemone, so that the anemone gets a benefit and the fish gets a benefit. Alright, so here we have the clownfish living inside the anemone. Remember that its mucal membrane on the outside of its body prevents it from getting stung by the stinging nematocysts. Excuse me, a little beverage there. Alright, here's another kind. Remember, not all clownfish are orange. Okay. And then here's some more here. Nemo! Alright, some commensal relationships in the ocean. The pearlfish, typically, they live inside clams and starfish and sea squirts. And they're simply commensal. They're not harming their host at all. However, some species are known to be parasitic on sea cucumbers, and the pearlfish will go up into their gut and start eating their sex organs from the inside out. And eventually that will kill the sea cucumber. Alright, so here's a pearlfish. It's very, very teeny. No, it's not going to swim inside of a human, but it can be parasitic to sea cucumbers. Alright, the parrotfish. These guys are known for their beaks that kind of like they scrape algae from the coral, and they're eating the coral. This contributes to coral sand and prevents algae from choking the coral. They can produce 90 kilograms of sand a year, and they to keep up with their teeth growth. because they'll break down their teeth with the coral, within the coral. They can maneuver their pectoral fins. Those are the side fins. Okay. They excrete mucus cocoon at night to hide the scent of themselves, so the predators can't find them at night. And if the parrotfish goes, the coral reefs go. That's how important they are for keeping the corals clean. And then here's a parrotfish smiling at you. Hi, students! Okay, I know I'm a dork. Alright, the damselfish. Hopefully you guys watch the Treasures of the Great Barrier Reef, because it is on the test. Alright, if you missed it, get the worksheet, and it is on YouTube. I've seen it on YouTube, so you should be okay. Now, the damselfish is brightly colored, and it's very territorial, which includes the sea anemone fish, some defended area. What happens is they clear out an area of coral, and they grow a garden of algae. And if a coral starts to get into it, it attacks the coral so that it can have the space to grow its algae garden. I wonder if that's on the test. Hint, hint, that's on the test. Alright, here's some Hawaiian domino damselfish. They don't look that brightly colored in this picture because these guys live in a different kind of environment. Okay, here's another type of damselfish. And we saw different species in the video, Treasures of the Great Barrier Reef. Alright, so now 3 types of reef. I cannot stress to you, I am going to give you a scenario on the short answer test that says, you're swimming in this area and you notice some stuff. Which kind of reef are you at? A fringing, a barrier, or an atoll? And you'll have to, and I'll give you other details, and you'll have to use those details to tell me, I am at a fringing reef because, and then you'll have to draw it. So make sure you pay attention to these notes, okay? Alright, so the types of reefs. Fringing, it's the simplest kind, okay? It's a narrow band right along the shore, so the coral reef is literally up at the sand. So you have the beach, the sand in the ocean, and then the coral reef's right there. And sometimes it's literally, there's no ocean sand. It's like right up to the water, and then the water goes sand. Where the water is, now you have coral reef. Okay? It's most vulnerable to pollution runoff because it's so close to the land. Alright, here is a fringing coral reef. You can see all that light blue area. It's right up against the land. Fringing coral reef. So if the reef is right by the land, no water, no ring of water between the land and the reef, it's a fringing coral reef. Okay, here's another one. I think this is along Belize. Okay, you can see that entire area of light right around the water there. All of this, okay, it's right next to the shore, next to all this beautiful green. That is a fringing coral reef. Very sharp, very jagged. It's hard to walk on a coral reef. Alright, so here's a fringing coral reef. You can see in the picture there. The reef has built itself up along the shore. You have the shore, maybe a little bit of, shallow water, and then you have coral reef. Okay, and then you go out to the ocean. Okay, you can see here, you have usually fringing coral reefs surround volcanic islands before the island starts to sink. Okay? Alright, the barrier reefs. Okay? They're farther from shore. They can be up to 60 miles away from the shore. They're separated from the shore by what's called a lagoon, and the lagoon is always, it goes land, lagoon, reef. Fringing reef, land, reef. Barrier reef, land, lagoon, reef. Okay? You can see here in the picture, you have the land on the left, you have a shallow lagoon. There's usually where, baby animals gain protection from larger animals out to sea. Then you've got the barrier reef. Okay, the Great Barrier Reef of Australia is like this. Okay, you have the Australian continent, you have a large expanse of lagoon, shallow type water, not shallow for the ocean, not shallow for humans. And then you have the big barrier reef that provides a lot of diversity of life in the ocean. Alright, here you can see now as that volcanic island shrunk and is falling deeper into the ocean, okay, the fringing coral reef did not move. It just became a barrier reef because it's not next to the land anymore. Okay? So you can see here. So this is kind of interesting. You have the land on the left there. You've got your lagoon. Sometimes little patch reefs form because, there's still plankton. There's still, coral that are going to drop down and start to form. But basically, over here you've got the spur and groove, the sand cays, the crest and the slope and all of that. And what happens is the sediments come in from the land and they go through the lagoon because of the wave action, and they go down those little spur and groove areas to get the sediment from the land down into deeper ocean. And sometimes it does build up on the top of that reef flat or the reef crest, and then when it does that, it forms what's called a sand cay. And so eventually, the sand cays could form islands. Okay, but one of the most important things about the reef here is you can see that as the ocean water comes in and it hits those reefs, the reef, it causes the ocean water to slow down, and the reef crest actually prevents a lot of erosion. So does the spur and groove. So they prevent the erosion of the reef from the water coming in. It's a little bit faster from the ocean, from the outer ocean itself. Okay, now sand islands that form on barrier reefs called sand cays. Okay, and sometimes they can get so big you can build on them. Okay, now these are the ones that are most in danger for when you have a global warming and the ocean waters rise. They're not very high off the ground, off the surface of the ocean, so that they can be flooded very quickly. Okay, spur and groove. It's a buttress. Okay, and what happens is it forms a windward side, and the windward side is the side that gets all the sand. That's the one that's out to the ocean, not the one that is towards the land itself. Okay, and a buttress is something that is used to fortify and build up and support and prevent the destruction of. So spur and groove in the coral is actually very important for protecting the coral reef itself. Okay, you can see here's the spurs and the grooves. Okay. Alright, the Great Barrier Reef in Belize. These are two very, this is the Great Barrier Reef in Australia. You can see land on the left, big old lagoon area, reef. That's how it goes. Okay, and the last of the three types of reefs are the atolls. It's a ring reef or cay that's surrounded by a surrounding lagoon. This is an atoll. There's no land in the center. The volcano that was there, the land that was in the middle that was there, then you had the fringing reef, and the volcano sunk a little bit, and then you had a barrier reef. Now the volcanic mountain has completely sunk down, and you have an atoll, which is a ring of islands or cays surrounding a very, very deep lagoon. Okay? Alright. Now they can be far from land, and they can be 1,000 meters deep. That is very, very deep. Now Darwin solved the puzzle on how it formed a ring reef by formed a fringing reef on a subsiding volcano. What happened was he was watching what happened, and he saw that as the volcano sunk, what happened with the reef. Okay, so this is a picture here. This is a very typical way. On the left, the top left there, that is your fringing reef volcanic island. And the island is still high because remember the asthenosphere and the mantle, and hot things make the mantle go up real high, or make the crust go up real high. But when the plates move past that hot spot underneath the mantle, underneath the crust there, then that volcanic island sinks back down because it's no longer as hot as it used to be. And when it starts to sink back down, it forms the second picture here, the barrier reef. Just the top of the mountain remains, a big lagoon area, and then you have the sand cays and the barrier around there, and causing a barrier reef. It prevents a lot of more destruction in the middle. Most of the outside gets the damage. And then once that volcanic island is gone, now you're left with an atoll. Okay? And an atoll is sand cays all around. Sometimes you can get trees and land built up there. That's coral reef. And then the center part where the volcano was has gotten so deep. Some of the deepest places that people dive is down into these atoll lagoons. There's a couple over in Vietnam that the volcanic island has sunk down, and because the atoll reef cuts it off from anything else that can get in there, the animals that live in the lagoon for the atoll, they are completely different. There's one atoll, a lagoon. It's in Vietnam, but I can't remember what it's called, and it literally has a species of jellyfish in there that evolved to not need stinging nematocysts because there's nothing in there for them to have to kill. They eat other things. It's much easier for them to feed. And why would they genetically produce nematocysts when they don't need them anymore? And so this is a type of evolution for the jellyfish. Alright, so here is a graphic representation of what happens over time as the volcanic island starts to sink. Darwin, he studied this and he hypothesized, that this is how the fringing reef turned into barrier reef, turned into the atoll. It is pretty amazing. You kind of see, because the fringing reef never went away, the barrier reef never went away, it just became an atoll over time. Alright, so here's how an atoll looks. The island, the continent, so far away, and then you go thousands of meters out to sea, where there used to be a volcanic island that is not there anymore because it sank down and formed an atoll with a giant lagoon in the center. So much fun! Alright, so this is another graphic representation of that. The volcanic island starts to sink, forms a barrier reef. Once the island's completely gone, atoll. Alright, so you can see here, you have the atoll. The volcanic island is completely submerged. It just gets deeper and deeper as the island sinks and starts to melt back into the asthenosphere. Alright, so here is some more pictures of an atoll. You can see there in the center, you've got the lagoon, you've got sand cays, you've got some spur and groove buttresses on the outside that protect the reef from being destroyed by the ocean water. And then you can see that lots and lots of organisms live here because the water is so shallow right around the atoll that the coral reefs are able to grow there. When the coral reefs grow, the animals come. If the coral reefs disappear, the animals die. Alright, this is another atoll. You can see that the sand cays are pretty big and that lots of trees and other plants live on them. You can see there's a lot of shallow water there. But in the center, when you look at an atoll, the darker the water is in the lagoon, the deeper it is. Okay, this is I think this is an aerial photo. I don't think it's satellite. But you can see there, the center of that atoll is very dark, which means that is very deep ocean water. Alright, here we have this is a bunch of atoll islands different islands and different variations of whether or not they're barrier, fringing barrier or atoll reefs. Okay, the ecology of reefs. The richest marine ecosystem, but surrounding oceans are poor in nutrients, little primary production. So the reason why the reefs are so important is because they make all the food for the ocean. And a lot of organisms, they travel to the reef and feed, and then they go back out to open water. The open water of the ocean is very poor in nutrients, and there's not a lot to eat out there. And so that's part of the reason why our coral reefs are so important, is because when we damage them, we're destroying habitat. We know, and I hope you guys remember, that the destruction of habitat is the #1 cause of species loss on our planet, not only in the ocean, but on land itself. Okay, so nutrients are recycled on the reef, and that makes it very efficient so that there's not waste nutrients, and algae is everywhere, which gives reefs the highest primary production of any marine community. Remember, you need the primary producers, the zooxanthellae, the algae, the turf builders, the coralline algae, the blue-green algae. You need all of those guys making energy from the sun so that energy can be passed on to the phytoplankton, and then go from the phytoplankton to the zooplankton to the fish, and all the way up the food chain to the apex predators and the food chains that happen to be there. Now, most plants are cryptic, they're hidden, inconspicuous. The zooxanthellae is hidden, phytoplankton just float in the water. Sometimes they live in things. You have filamentous algae that live in limestone so that you can't get to them. And so what happens is they found a place to hide, and they're happy there so they don't get consumed, and they can keep doing their job of making the energy for the ocean. Okay? Now we have the hidden microalgae, the sea grasses there in the crevices, and then the turf algae. We talked about these guys before. And then we have the blue-green algae, the cyanobacteria. Beautiful, beautiful organisms. Okay, then you have your coralline algae. microbes. These guys are your reef builders. Most important primary producers are the zooxanthellae and the turf algae. Mutualistic symbiotic associations with zooxanthellae are super important for the health of the coral and the health of every organism that lives and survives off of the coral reef. You can see them here. Remember these pictures of the giant clams with the zooxanthellae living inside of them. Very mutualistic symbiotic relationship. Okay. Other things that cycle nutrients through the coral reef: sponges, clams, other invertebrates. Okay. The algae, they all recycle nutrients, and it's very important that we recycle everything, and the coral reefs and the animals that live in there are very, very good at that. But we as humans have this uncanny ability to destroy these kind of relationships, and we don't know how to fix them most times. Alright, and here you have this is a sponge. Alright, so the last thing I want to talk to you guys about is the final component to your short answer test. Pay close attention to your classmates' presentations because they will tell you how human activities have led to the destruction of coral reefs. Please take notes in your notebook and study those for your test there. And then be prepared to list an example and explain how humans have negatively affected the coral reefs over the planet. So, you say, okay, well, and I've given you one. Okay, so fertilizer runoff into the ocean. How does our use of fertilizers affect the ocean itself? So make sure you pay attention to that. And I know this has been an hour, but if I had been in class and you'd been writing, this would have taken you a lot longer. So you can pause this video as need be to take your notes, highlight where you need to, call me if you have questions. I'm more than willing to help you with that. And remember, I'll be back on February 1st. Some of you guys have a lot of work to get into me. Get it in by February 1st. Remember, February 2nd, February 4th, test retakes, lunch and after school. Shouldn't take you too long, but I would study for your coral reef test this week and then study over the weekend for your invertebrates retest. Okay? You guys have a good weekend, and I'll put this on, make it available for you as soon as I am able to upload it. See you guys soon. Bye.